As part of this AEW Forbidden Door kind of preview, I'll start with kind of my review of going to AEW Dynamite / Collision / I guess Rampage matches thrown in there as well. This past weekend, the KeyBank Center in Buffalo, New York. Now, I've been to 3 prior AEW events, 2 previous Dynamite events, and 1 major pay-per-view, AEW Revolution, this past year, Sting's final match in Greensboro. This was my first Dynamite since they switched up the sets and the logos from a few years ago and made it a little more colorful. And this was my first Dynamite since MJF has made his return. And yes, it's been my first AEW show in a little bit of time since the Revolution pay-per-view back in March. Now, I've been to the KeyBank Center many times in Buffalo, New York. There's only one time I've been there, and it wasn't for a WWE event, and it was for a Coldplay concert, which was the most sold out I have seen that arena. But otherwise, I've seen it in various states throughout WWE, including the lowest crowd I've ever seen it to the point of last night, which was actually a pay-per-view, now in retrospect very important pay-per-view. I was there when a 10-year-old Dominic was ringside, hoping his father, Rey Mysterio, would beat Eddie Guerrero at the Great American Bash so that Eddie Guerrero would not reveal the secret he had. And while Rey Mysterio did win that match, and Ray and Dominic, who was just 10 years old then, walked away, and that was the first time I'd ever even attended a pay-per-view event. Eddie Guerrero obviously revealed the secret just a few days later on the SmackDown that took place in Rochester, New York. And also at that Great American Bash, the last appearance of Muhammad Hassan as he lost to The Undertaker. And what's weirdly enough, as I just kind of said, is the smallest crowd I've ever seen ever at KeyBank Center, then known as HSBC Arena, was that Great American Bash pay-per-view, where they got about 5,900 people really just selling the TV side of things. Well, we fast forward to AEW Dynamite this past week, and I got to see firsthand all the memes, all the GIFs, all the social media pictures people post from AEW Dynamite events, because, yeah, the place was very dead. Now, not dead from a crowd perspective. The people that were there were very much into it, but it was the smallest crowd I've ever seen in an arena that can hold upwards of 19,000 people. There was probably 3,500 people there, solely only on the TV side of things, solely only in the lower levels. It definitely didn't need that big of an arena. So it was kind of eerie. It was kind of strange. I've never been to that arena when so many concession stands were closed, so many of the hallways were empty. Definitely a different experience at KeyBank Center in Buffalo during the Dynamite Collision tapings. Also, if you are knowledgeable about the AEW product, and we're definitely going to talk about it when it comes to this pay-per-view, but they are no slouches, Tony Khan specifically, about making sure that you get your fill of wrestling. So much so that, from my knowledge, there was matches before I got to the AEW taping, and there were matches after I left the AEW taping. So I was there for a good 3.5 hours. That's a lot of time. That's a lot to be there. I think I missed some Rampage matches. They were taping before 7:30, and I left right around 11:15 when they were still doing 1 or 2 more Collision matches when I took off. But I saw all of Dynamite and obviously a lot of the big matches that are taped for Collision this week. So they give you a lot of wrestling, probably a little too much if you're somebody who's maybe new to the product or tagging along with a friend. Gets a little suffocating. But definitely here's some things I will say as positives, right? It has nothing to do with the size of the crowd, has nothing to do with how popular AEW is, just some things that they do well that I wish WWE would do. Because really, the size of a crowd really isn't an excuse for why you can do things better or worse, right? And one, it's the stage, right? We always talk about the WWE stage, but in realisticness, there isn't a WWE stage. There's a WWE set, but no stage. There used to be a stage, but there currently isn't one, while AEW actually has a stage, has a set. The whole set is great, and it's kind of weird because of the fact that if you watch WWE nowadays and you watch AEW, the company that's drawing 3,000 has a set that is more indicative, more, grandiose in the world of professional wrestling, while the WWE is lacking therefore. And listen, we're not going to get into the conversation about why WWE has the smaller set so they can fit more people in. The point is, when there are shows where the people don't need to be fit in, or, it's just not necessary, or just not needed. AEW, for example, could have filled that arena, and, they probably still would have had the same set, right? WWE's had big sets before in the past. Throughout the Attitude Era, they had big sets. Throughout some of their other days where they're selling out crowds, they've had bigger sets, right? WrestleMania, pretty big set. So, they could definitely take one out of the AEW book by returning to the days of nice television sets that look good on TV, that look good to the crowd, that really are just, a pleasure on the eyes, right? And also, AEW knows how to maneuver through commercial breaks. WWE, I've been to so many live TV shows, and I can tell you, it's commercial break, especially on a Monday Night Raw. It's just suffocating with the amount of commercial breaks. And what I mean by that is, yes, obviously the commercial breaks occur at home, which is suffocating enough. But AEW finds a way to really gloss over those for the fans in attendance. Only once during the entire Dynamite taping did Justin Roberts ever acknowledge, hey, right now we're in a commercial break? Because other than that, there was entrance music playing for people coming to the ring. Matches were still starting, even if they weren't on television, or even if television went to commercial break. So really seamlessly, it didn't feel like there's a lot of that filler. If you've gone to a Monday Night Raw, if you've gone to that SmackDown, you've seen those filler videos a million times over. The filler video where it shows all the wrestlers on all the late night talk shows. They do the whole Stone Cold segment where he's interviewing Lita or Ron Simmons or Edge or somebody, and they're doing that kind of little preview for, the Broken Skull sessions now available on Peacock, or some other available show on Peacock that is just suffocating kind of commercials and really take you out of the action when you are there live. And they darken the crowd and stuff, so somebody will come to the ring and boom, they turn the lights out and they play a commercial. AEW doesn't do that. It didn't seem like there was ever a time where they just said cut, right? It seemed like a very seamless show. So I will give AEW the credit when it comes to that. And by being in attendance, I, who doesn't watch AEW maybe as much as a lot of those quote-unquote sickos out there, right, got a little of what I needed to get ready for AEW Forbidden Door this upcoming Sunday in Long Island, New York. This is the third AEW New Japan Forbidden Door. The first one in Chicago, because of course that's where AEW is like headquartered, you'd think, right? Last year was in Toronto, and it's kind of funny because my, I guess, allegiance, and while I try not to pick teams, but I guess my favoritism a little bit towards the WWE is the reason why I'm not attending some of these Forbidden Doors, because it was last year that it was in Toronto, but I was at that time on my way to London, was attempting to go to WWE Money in the Bank, and this year, right, while it is in New York, I'm kind of foregoing going to AEW New Japan Forbidden Door so that next weekend I can go to Toronto, where last year's Forbidden Door was, to see Money in the Bank. So Scotiabank Arena, back-to-back years, they are very busy at the end of June and early July when it comes to big-time wrestling pay-per-view events. But I won't be attending Forbidden Door this weekend, but I think I got what I need when it comes to Forbidden Door. But one thing I just want to kind of say about this past week on AEW Dynamite, and I listened to a lot of AEW After Dark and SiriusXM Radio after the show was over, and some people were saying some of the same things that I think as well, and that is MJF has really lost a lot of momentum since his return. The promo we had last night, or this past week, against Daniel Garcia was definitely not one of his best. Not anything you're going to see going viral. Not anything that you're going to want to watch millions of times over. And it just, I don't know if it's just the fervor. I don't know if it's the enthusiasm. But, he just spoke like someone speaking. It didn't seem like an MJF promo where he is really alluding. He is really coming out of doing an out-of-body kind of experience in the promo, which you're used to in the past with MJF, really coming off the page, as they say. What you see with The Rock or Stone Cold or The Undertaker. When they come out to the ring, they're larger-than-life figures. And MJF, while not the tallest person in the world, his promos, right, and his presence in AEW in the past has made him that. But since his return, it has not been that really at all. But moving on to AEW New Japan Forbidden Door, I will say one thing I would change about this pay-per-view, and I got this kind of outside of hearing WWE former alumni Tommy Dreamer say this, and I think this event, we've had it now 3 years in North America. Maybe it's time we move this to Japan. Because for the first time, right, AEW New Japan Forbidden Door happened, there was a ton of stars that existed in New Japan. Jay White, Will Ospreay, right? Even Mercedes Moné, right, in past years, right, who you wanted to see kind of to that larger audience that we're familiar with on the North American wrestling scene with All Elite Wrestling. But since then, those people have crossed over, right? Okada is in AEW, right? Will Ospreay is in AEW. Jay White is in AEW. So those people have crossed over, which makes it, essentially because some of those big names have made their way to AEW, a lot of fans who are maybe a little more on the casual side have not watched as much New Japan as they had in the past when Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega were essentially there and there alone, same with the Young Bucks. Right now that you get that fill in America, New Japan has kind of fallen off, which means that we've seen, less New Japan excitement. So the people that are coming over for AEW New Japan Forbidden Door, a lot of them, to my eyes, are not as, household names, as the Okadas of the world were many years ago, or Will Ospreays of the world were many years ago. And kind of starting with this card, and what I kind of alluded to with obviously saying about how the TV taping was just a lot to swallow. This pay-per-view card, as well as any pay-per-view card, is way, way too big. I say this, and believe me, I would say this on WWE, even, and the crazy thing is WWE, if they present to you 13 matches, they're not even in the past going to be very long. Some of them are going to be 10-second squash matches, right? So even when it comes to like a major company, if they were trying to provide me with 13 matches on a pay-per-view and a pre-show, I would say that's too many, and that's with some of them being nothing. That's with some of them being 5 minutes long. But with AEW, they actually try to make all of these matches have length. And there is not a company in the world that I think in the world of professional wrestling who would benefit more from the WWE current model of 5-match pay-per-views than AEW, right? Because this is a 4-hour pay-per-view, not even counting the pre-show, and it is just, it's too much, right? I don't really know anybody out there, listen, AEW diehards, anybody who doesn't think that 13 matches, especially when these matches are going to have volume, they're going to have substance, they're going to have length, because we know Tony Khan isn't a traditional booker. These are not all about stories. This is AEW New Japan Forbidden Door. This is kind of a one-off pay-per-view, right? This is just about delivering good matches. And having 13 matches with the pre-show and delivering good matches, yeah, there'll be great matches, but the length will just be too long. And it's what people complained about with WrestleMania years ago, where, listen, we wanted that triple threat match for the Women's Championship, the main event. We wanted that women's main event. We clamored for it, but by the time it finally got there at the end of the show, people were just exhausted. And in this sense, I'm going to think that by the time we get to this main event, people are going to be exhausted. Remember, Sting's last match at the AEW pay-per-view back in March wasn't as bloated as this pay-per-view is, and this one is bloated. I can't even necessarily get to all the pre-show matches. I mean, Chris Statlander and Wannabe teaming up to face Willow Nightingale and Nakano, it is just too much, right? We got the Women's Championship, right, with Timeless Toni Storm and Ishikawa, who they teamed up at AEW Dynamite this past week, right, with Mariah May, right? We've seen her kind of in support of both of these candidates, but we still have Mariah May with Timeless Toni Storm, right, and Ishikawa and Luther, who they come out to the ring with, in a pre-show match against Saraya, which is not needed, right? It's a women's Owen Hart Cup first-round match, but it's not needed on the pay-per-view. It's not needed on the pre-show. In fact, looking at this pre-show, I'm not saying that these matches are going to be awful, right? Because you got some big-time players on there. Takahashi, against the Lucha Brothers with Rey Fenix and Mystico. But, I mean, just how much can you watch, especially for the fact that a lot of these people are not as household names as they were in past New Japan years, right? Back in the day, we watched Wrestle Kingdom, but we still really only knew 5 or 6 guys from a casual wrestler's perspective, right? Somebody who literally watches nothing but wrestling would have to know that, right? I watch football, baseball, basketball, movies. I go to amusement parks. I get ice cream. I work. I like other television shows, right? I like just having a night off where I don't watch television at all, right? And unless you're somebody who watches nothing but wrestling, who doesn't care about baseball, basketball, football, soccer, doesn't care about any of that, and watches nothing but wrestling every single day, then you don't know who these people are, right? And now we're at a time where, like I said, Will Ospreay, Kenny Omega, all these people are in AEW now. So the amount of people we recognize from New Japan is probably the least it has ever been. So to have 13 matches that essentially have New Japan ties is very difficult to also put on television. We got a ladder match for the AEW TNT Championship. Takashita against Mark Briscoe, Jack Perry, Dante Martin, Leo Rush, and El Phantasmo. We got this vacant AEW TNT Championship going on right now. I'm going to guess Jack Perry's going to win this, right? He's going to bring the title back, to the side of the Young Bucks. They're going to try to, have all the gold, as they said on the past week of Dynamite. So I'm going to say this goes to Jack Perry. Maybe Mark Briscoe. I think that's kind of the thing here. I mean, there's a lot of good players here, but Mark Briscoe and Jack Perry are really the ones who are somewhat, right, in a storyline here at this time. And moving on to the singles match for the AEW Women's World Championship, you got Timeless Toni Storm. As I mentioned, she's defending the Women's Championship against Mina Shirakawa. And I don't see the AEW Women's Championship leaving AEW. So that's a tough one. For Toni Storm not to essentially win. But moving on to another women's match on the main card. This one belongs here, right? Because you got Mercedes Moné, right? The biggest woman free agent signing in a long time, right? Against Stephanie Valkyr. It is for the AEW TBS Championship and the New Japan Strong Women's Championship. Mercedes recently went down to CMLL and kind of got involved there in a match that Stephanie was competing in and held up both titles. And I gotta say, I think Mercedes is going to win this. I think she is going to bring home the New Japan Strong Women's Championship because her presence in the future on New Japan programming, right, is only a positive, right? And I think that is kind of the trade-off here to have New Japan, right? Because this is really an AEW pay-per-view for all extensive purposes. So that everything that's been built up has been mostly on AEW television. So to kind of have this trade and kind of have this barter where Mercedes Moné is actually going to win, which seems like a win for AEW, but it means a win for New Japan because she is then going to bring that New Japan title to a New Japan show and be on New Japan programming like she had been in the past as a part of New Japan Wrestling. So I think Mercedes Moné is going to leave winning this. Now, I don't know what your current opinion is on the Learning Tree version of Chris Jericho, right? It's Chris Jericho and Big Bill versus Jeff Cobb. Oh, and Jeff Cobb, I apologize, right? So Jeff Cobb came out on this past week's Collision, right, and joined up with Chris Jericho and Big Bill as their third partner. As part of the Learning Tree in this trios match. They were trying to get Minoru Suzuki and had a video package from him, which he said that he was not interested in being a part of the match with the Learning Tree and kind of offended Chris Jericho. But it ended up finding out on Collision, which has already been taped. Chris Jericho, Big Bill, Cass, if you will, Big Cass, and Jeff Cobb versus Samoa Joe, Hook, and Shibata. If I say any of these names right, again, we're talking about New Japan here. I'm trying my best, right? I don't watch New Japan enough, and I don't watch AEW enough to recognize some of the only New Japan names that have been appearing on their programming. Especially when you're in attendance in person, too, right? You don't have the benefit of the commentary team. But, I don't know. This Chris Jericho, he's been a little of a Eugene. It's been a little, if you're familiar with that reference. The Learning Tree, it's not necessarily, my thing, my cup of tea here. It's normally Chris Jericho, Big Bill, and Brian Keith. Brian Keith is currently, out right now with injury. He is going to be at the side of Learning Tree. But yeah, it's not my cup of tea. I'm mad Samoa Joe, Hook team are going to win this one. A singles match, which I think should be, they should get rid of all the pre-show matches and put this on the pre-show. But while I think it's a decent match, and that's Zack Sabre Jr. versus Orange Cassidy. If you go to any AEW tapings in the last, since their existence, you're going to see not just Orange Cassidy, but maybe even multiple appearances by it. This is essentially the flag bearer for this company, Orange Cassidy. Everyone loves him. He hasn't changed his character really one bit since his introduction into this company. Zack Sabre Jr., he is a name that you still recognize from New Japan Wrestling. He was there and a big mainstay a couple years ago, still there now. Looking forward to this match. Hopefully it's a good match, but one that's, again, not too long. I don't think this needs to be 30 minutes. I think this can be a good 12-minute match between Zack Sabre Jr. and Orange Cassidy. Entertaining. As we move on to the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. The IWGP World Heavyweight Championship that's held by Jon Moxley, right? As he takes on Naito. And this is a guy you recognize from New Japan, right? This is a guy that is still someone in New Japan Wrestling, right? I'm talking about Naito. I'm saying these names wrong, right? Naito, right? Tensue Naito, right? He is somebody who has been in New Japan all of his career. He is one of those ones that transcends, so you know about him, in North America. And, Naito. I don't know why I said that wrong. I knew it the whole time. Naito, right? So it's Jon Moxley versus Naito, and it's for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. Now, this is where the AEW star, I don't think, wins. I think Naito wins this one. He brings his championship back to New Japan. It's MJF, his spot in this pay-per-view, which is not necessarily needed because it's a storyline against New Japan and a guy who's mostly actually in CMLL, and that's Hecatterero, formerly known as Rey Hecatterero. And listen, I've seen him perform on AEW television and stuff like that, but again, I don't necessarily know if the story here is strong enough. It's just a way to get MJF on the card because everyone has to be on every one of these cards. The Elite, Matt Jackson, Nick Jackson, and Okada versus the Acclaimed with Tanahashi as part of them. Anthony Bowens, Max Caster, and Tanahashi. This is a six-man tag that should be on this card. The Learning Tree Samoa Joe hook match maybe could not be on this card. Maybe could be, reserved for future television. But, this is, I think, a pay-per-view caliber match. Now, the crazy thing about this is it's really mostly AEW guys versus AEW guys with some New Japan mixed in, right? Okada, we know, is fully actually in AEW, has amazing ties with New Japan, but is in AEW, and Tanahashi, right, still with New Japan. So he's really the only person here that is not essentially under AEW contract, to my knowledge, at this time. So either way, that's going to be a pretty good match. Bryan Danielson, he's got to be on the card. He is in a men's Owen Hart Cup tournament first round match. This could have been on the pre-show, right? Again, get rid of everything on the pre-show. Move this on the pre-show as he takes on New Japan's Shingo Takahashi, right? A New Japan guy. A strong guy. 4-time never openweight champion in New Japan. This should be a good match. Bryan Danielson, right? He doesn't know how and isn't allowed to have anything that's like 10 minutes or shorter. Just not in his contract. He's got to go out here for like 25 minutes in this match. Even if it's just an Owen Hart tournament first round match, it's on the pay-per-view. They got to go balls to the wall in this match. Anything Bryan Danielson does, right, and anyone he works with, he just makes better. His career, as we know, right, it's kind of had that tea leaves of it's coming down to an end. Should be a good match. And I don't necessarily know if it had the story to be on the pay-per-view, but a good match nonetheless. And a match that has a story, that belongs in the pay-per-view. I can't wait to see this. And I tell you, as somebody who's seen this man a few times, both in New Japan, right, as a New Japan Ring of Honor only show, and a New Japan AEW show, right, in Dynamite. And also, AEW pay-per-view a couple months ago. Will Ospreay is a must-see. He is, without a doubt, if you love wrestling, the most in-the-ring, entertaining thing in wrestling. He is an amazing wrestler. If you have a chance to see him in person, do that. Will Ospreay is awesome. Swerve Strickland, no disrespect to him. He is great as well. These guys kind of finished off a tag team together this past week on Dynamite, where we obviously saw some dissension, right? That's how every match on Dynamite ended this past week. A ton of dissension, but I can't wait to see this, right? These are two of the best in the business right now. This is a main event in any building. This is a main event of a major big WWE pay-per-view. I cannot wait to see this match. Unfortunately, though, there are 13 matches on this card if you count the pre-show, right? There are 10 matches on this card if you just count the pay-per-view itself, and it doesn't do justice to a Swerve Strickland and Will Ospreay for the AEW World Championship. There should be 5, 6 matches on this pay-per-view. Swerve Strickland, Will Ospreay should be getting more billing. We shouldn't have to sit through essentially 4 hours of wrestling, with pre-show included, before we get to this match. That's a travesty. But either way, I can't wait to watch this match. I'm going to watch this match, try to watch it live. Swerve Strickland, Will Ospreay. I see Swerve Strickland retaining the championship, but I do see Will Ospreay maybe getting a rematch down the line, and obviously AEW All In, just about 2 months away, in England, in London, in Wembley Stadium. If Will Ospreay wins, I think this sets up for a big-time championship match at that pay-per-view. If he doesn't win, I think it still sets him up for a big-time pay-per-view match at that pay-per-view. And, from what we know, right, this is the last pay-per-view, before All In. So, at least, in the AEW perspective, right? So, I think Will Ospreay is going to main event back-to-back pay-per-views. I just see Swerve Strickland retaining at Forbidden Door. Tell us what you think about AEW Forbidden Door when we post this on YouTube. Below on our YouTube videos, you can obviously comment or find us on social media at Heel to the Face. Should be an entertaining pay-per-view. Just hope it's not too long and that we don't get burned out.